So, so to start, I don't think that I have a culture identity, at least not an obvious one. It wasn't something that was important in our house where I grew up. I came from a family that was of white European descent, and no one really seemed to care which countries we may have originated from or practice any cultural mannerisms or anything like that in our home. For me, growing up, culture is what everyone else seemed to possess. It always seemed to me that everyone who was not white identified with some kind of culture or ethnic group. And I didn't seem to have one. Other families seem to care a lot of their history and what it meant to be where they were from. I always wanted to feel that sort of attachment to a culture, but no one in my family had anything to contribute about culture in our lives. Um, as an adult, I greatly enjoy learning about other cultures and their histories and their traditions, and especially the kinds of foods they eat. I love trying foods from different cultures. Everyone is so different and unique, and um, it's interesting. Um, for my cultural plunge, I chose to watch the 2018 film called Roma. It's in Spanish and it's set in between 1970 and 1971 in Mexico. The movie's language was in Spanish. One thing I've come to realize when watching foreign films is you have to actually pay attention to what's going on. If you turn and look at something else or start talking to somebody, you might miss something that's said because you didn't understand it by just hearing it. You have to read it through the subtitles. I also find that sometimes I feel like I miss what's going on in the back, what's happening on screen, because I'm looking at the bottom of the screen for what's being said, so I don't miss that. So sometimes I feel like you miss what's happening on screen. So it's a different experience sometimes watching a foreign film because it seems like you lose something somewhere. You have to pay more attention to the dialogue, but then you lose what's happening on screen. There was some instances in this movie that I didn't know what was going on. Some of the cultural context, some of the stuff going on at the time, it didn't make sense to me because I'm not familiar with the culture of this where this movie took place. And I went into this movie not knowing anything about it other than it was recommended to me. And I had heard good things and that it was a very meaningful movie to the director as it was taken from memories of his own childhood experiences. The movie follows the life of a domestic worker in a doctor's home. The first thing I found interesting about this movie that I wasn't expecting was that the family she worked for was white and they spoke fluent English. I wasn't expecting a white, well off family in the middle of Mexico. Roma takes place partly during the Corpus Christi massacre of 1971, but it is not a focus of the movie. Um, we are following a woman named Cleo at an important time in her life that also is during the Corpus Christi massacre. She becomes pregnant in the midst of the movie, and the father of the baby wants nothing to do with her once he finds out. He takes off, and she has a little difficulty finding him again. She is scared to tell her employer that she's become pregnant. Her first reaction is that she thinks she's going to get fired for it. And I think that is something very telling for that time and that place, that a woman's first thought when they accidentally get pregnant is that they're going to be fired. Her employer, the mother of the house, seems to be nice and tells her she's not going to be fired for being pregnant and hugs her. And the kids that she also looks after in this house come and hug her as well. The mother of the employer also takes her to their own doctor to be checked out to make sure everything is okay and that she's okay. And so they seem to be fairly supportive of her, even though she's unmarried, has lost touch with the father of the baby. She kind of just continues about her normal life as her stomach grows. But behind the scenes, we see that the family she works for is slowly falling apart. The husband has left and is hiding from their children. that they're splitting up, and everything just seems to be slowly falling apart in the back. One interesting thing that I didn't understand that happened in the movie is the employer family, minus the husband, goes to visit some other relatives. And that part of the family has stuffed and mounted all the dogs and pets they have ever had that have lived in that house up on the walls. So, like either the entire animal, if it was a small dog, or the heads were mounted up on the walls. And the whole house was then also decorated, with different animals that they've hunted. And I was absolutely shocked by this. And I'm not sure if it was common practice that people have done before, but I would have a hard time living in a house that had so many deceased animals everywhere, especially pets. I wouldn't want to be around my pets that I loved like that. I have seen several foreign films now as an adult. And one thing that I've noticed that always stands out in non-American movies is other countries don't shy away from difficult subjects or nudity or violence. And this movie was no different. There was full frontal male nudity, which in American films is rare. They just don't do that in America. And so when it does happen in a movie, I'm always a little taken aback, like, oh my gosh, it's a naked man on the screen, because they don't do that in America. And I always find it very interesting how other countries don't shy away from some of those things that we do here. Um, One part of the movie that I had to stop and take a moment from was when Cleo went into labor. It was right in the middle of a furniture store during the massacre of hundreds of innocent students during the Corpus Christi massacre. The employer, the grandmother of the family, had taken Cleo to a furniture store to buy her a crib for her and the baby. And through the store windows, we see where this peaceful protest, when they had first arrived at the store, has turned violent as some other people have shown up and just started shooting all these students. And at one point, a couple, a man and a woman, come into this furniture store to try to take refuge, and they're found, and the man is killed right in front of Cleo. And a few more of the shooters run in, and one of them happens to be the father of Cleo's baby. And earlier in the movie, Cleo had found him, and he freaked out on her and was like, if you come back here, I will hurt you. And he points the gun at her, and I'm worried he's going to shoot her, but then all his fellow gunmen are pulling him. They want to go find more protesters, and they run out of the furniture store. And after that, Cleo goes into labor and is rushed to the hospital. And we follow her out of there of the store, and there are people everywhere, people that have been shot and killed, and people crying over their bodies as she's being taken away. And when we get to the hospital, there are just pregnant women walking around everywhere in labor, and there's not any birth rooms or things like that. It was a very different experience from what I went through with my two children. There's no private rooms. Everyone is just in one big room concealed by a curtain. When Cleo gets there, the nurse listens to Cleo's stomach and can't find the heartbeat. So they take her to a surgical room because she's crowning, and the baby's not crying when they pull it out. And one difference, I think, with American films is that now that in an American film, the camera will pan away. We wouldn't see anything else. It would be understood the baby was dead. The camera didn't shy away from any of this. We see the deceased baby pulled out. They stick it on a table next to her, and they try to resuscitate it a couple times, all while Cleo was watching and quietly crying. And they allowed her to hold it for maybe 15 seconds. It was less than 30 seconds. And then they take it away and wrap it up to dispose of it. And after this, I had to turn the movie off for a few minutes because I was crying very hard. After this incident, Cleo goes back to her normal life. She's gone kind of quiet and is obviously in not a great place. And the employer, who is now getting ready to tell her kids that her and their father are separating. She takes them on vacation, and they bring Cleo with the pretense that she won't have to work during this. This is a vacation for her too, hoping to make her happy. And during this trip, Cleo ends up saving two of the children from drowning. And there's a moment where everybody is hugging, and they tell her how much they love her and everything. And then Cleo cries and tells them she prayed to not have the baby. And that was a hard moment for me. Then after the supposed vacation, they go back, and when Cleo gets there, she's immediately just right back into her chores as if nothing had ever happened. And I thought that was very interesting. Like, oh, they took her on this vacation and they love her, so they say. But then they get back and she's right back to being their domestic worker. Um, the movie affected me quite a bit, especially the whole birth scene and the scene where she rescues the kids and says she didn't want the baby. Um, Partly it affected me so much because I lost my first pregnancy to a miscarriage. And even though I had a lot of traumatic events in my life, that was one of the most devastating things I'd ever been through. So watching that scene was very hard. And especially that they didn't shy away from it. You watched it. And then when Chloe said she didn't want the baby, like she felt like she had wished that into existence. I thought Roma was a very good movie. It was powerful and a little difficult to watch, but sometimes we need to watch difficult things. It's important. And I thought this was a good cultural plunge because there was a lot that would have been filmed differently had it been an American movie. And it also would have been, it's important to see how things are in other places. So overall, it was a difficult experience, but still a good experience.